Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Zonda Wine Podcast. My name is Sean Zilberberg, and here we interview the biggest names in wine. We're here in Buenos Aires, Argentina, and luckily, Laura Catena is here. Laura, you can't talk about Argentinian wine if we don't talk about Catena, so thank you so much. It's an honor to sit down with you here. Laura is the fourth generation, correct? Fourth generation?
Well, I'm the fourth generation in Argentina, but the sixth if you count the two generations that made wine in Italy.
Okay, that made wine in Italy. That's a very good point because Argentina has a very interesting culture with wine history. A lot of immigrants came to Argentina in the early 1900s. In 1902, Nicola Catena came and started Catena Zapata or Bodega Catena Zapata.
Yeah. Well, actually, it was first called Bodega Viñedos Nicolás Catena.
Okay.
And then when my grandfather married his wife, my grandmother Angelica Zapata, it became Catena Zapata.
Okay, there we go. And then just a multi-generation, it's still a family-owned business here and based in Mendoza and also both in Buenos Aires. Laura, thank you so much. So one thing that's really cool about Laura is you wear a lot of hats in your life.
Yeah.
I mean, you worked in medicine before, you studied in the US.
27 years,
27
emergency physician.
Emergency physician. So your heart rate's been at a high level for...
Yeah, it's always high. And I drink a lot of coffee, which makes things worse.
I was going to say, so you do that, and now you're also running Catena Zapata, and possibly the hardest job of all, you're a mother. You're a mother to 3 kids, correct?
Well, but they're better off when they see me less.
Okay.
Because you don't want a mother that's as intense as I am. So actually, I think I'm doing them a service by, working and leaving them to make their own decisions sometimes.
Yeah. You're based in San Francisco. Do you travel a lot for your work?
Well, I don't consider that I'm based in San Francisco. I'm literally based in Mendoza and San Francisco. Mm-hmm. You know, like those people in the U.S. that live between New York and Florida.
Yeah.
That's me, but in San Francisco and Mendoza.
Got it. I'm from Miami. We call them snowbirds, right?
Yeah,
but you travel a much longer distance.
I'm a snowbird too. I'm going to the mountains, the Andes snow.
Amazing. So the flight is easy for you? I mean, does the flight ever feel like, oh my God, it's so long?
It's not great. I don't love it, but I have my little rituals. I save some podcasts. Mm-hmm. I occasionally have to take a sleeping pill if I have a really uncomfortable seat, just to manage the night. And then, I try to sleep well the next 2 days. And, I know people in other parts of the world that have to commute 2 hours to work in either walking or in a very uncomfortable bus.
Yeah.
If the worst I have to do is be on a flight for 15 hours, I can do it to follow my passion.
Exactly. and talking about passion, we're talking about the wine industry. Wine has been a part of your life then since your upbringing, right? Because it's been in your family for many decades, correct? So growing up, I mean, Nicolás Catena is your father. Did he introduce wine to you at a young age, really showing you the ropes?
Yeah, well, I always had the Italian thing really strong in my mind because my great-grandfather was Italian. He came to Argentina. Then my grandfather, Domingo Vicente, but he came from the names Domenico Vincenzo, which were his father and his grandfather and great-grandfather, because you know how the Italians name the kids.
Yeah.
And so my grandfather, my nonno, we called him nonno like you do in Italian, he knew how to do all the Italian things. So he made his own prosciutto, he made his own olive oil, he grew the best tomatoes. And so we grew up in this family where Italian culture was really, really strong. However, usually the girls did not go to the winery. So, my grandfather would take my brother to the winery or they'd tour the vineyards. However, we bonded over the dogs. So I used to watch my grandfather's dogs.
Okay.
So my grandfather had a lot of dogs because in the countryside you don't have alarms, you have dogs. So the security are dogs.
The barking.
And so exactly. And so he loved dogs. He was obsessed with dogs. I'm obsessed with dogs. And so, somebody had to comb the dogs and take out the garrapatas. What's the name for a garrapata in English? It's the ticks. The ticks. So I would remove the ticks from these big dogs that would not bite me, which is crazy. And then I would take care of when they would have babies because often dogs in Argentina are not spayed or neutered. So he and I bonded over the dogs, and he called me La Lauchita, which means a little mouse, because I never sat still, and I still never sit still.
It's very true, having known you for years.
Yeah.
So they would be in the vineyard, you would be taking care of the dogs,
Yeah.
and then. So take me through this. So you went into emergency medicine, right? You started that. Why did you want to do that?
Yeah. Well, first to answer the question about when I was introduced to wine. So in the olden days, you would get soda water with a little splash of wine, and that was given to kids. Okay. And today I tell people don't do that, but honestly, it was like 0.00, 1% alcohol. It wasn't a lot. It was just for color. But why did I study medicine? Was because I was passionate about biology when I went to Harvard undergrad, and I wanted to help people. And honestly, I did not think at that time, in my late teens, that I could help people with wine. Today, I feel like wine could solve most of the world's problems, because when people drink wine, they relax a little bit. If you drink wine with food, it makes meals better. It makes you linger in the meal with friends. The cardioprotective effects versus potential cancer risks, that's a whole other discussion that we're not going to talk about. But to me, in moderation, alcohol is pleasure positive and what I call health neutral. So there's positives and negatives, so in the end it's neutral. I think also farming of vineyards brings you to the earth. So people who drink wine, maybe they live in a big city with lots of noise.
They're not close to nature.
They're not close to nature, and that bottle of wine brings you to the vineyard. You can look up where it comes from. We have actually a wine where we have the sounds of the vineyard on a QR code. You can go to that vineyard through that wine, and so the connection to nature. There's a really big movement preserving old vines right now. I was at a conference in California, the Old Vine Conference.
The Old Vine Conference.
Yeah, it was amazing, and people there were so passionate about preserving these old vines. And I was talking to Morgan Peterson, of the famous
Bedrock Wine Company,
of Zinfandel, and he was talking about how he has all these customers that order the wine and really care about the fact that he is preserving these old vineyards. And they really care that that wine comes from these heritage vines that are really old. So to me, this desire to preserve the land that comes from loving wine is so important to the health of people and to the planet.
And the identity of cultures as well. France, they call it the blood of the soil, right?
And also, culture brings people together, their families, the communities. And so at that time, I didn't think wine could help people. I thought that medicine could help people, and I think both can help people. Both can.
I ask myself that same thing because I work in the wine industry as well, and sometimes I sit down and I'm like, am I helping the world? Am I doing anything to move the needle? And I'm happy you mentioned that, because most of the time I say I'm not doing anything really noble. Maybe I'm just making sure.
You're definitely doing noble, because what are we on this earth for? We're here to make the world a better place, to be a good family member, a good friend, and with good wine and food,
that happens over drinking.
It happens a little more easily. On the other hand, I do think as a doctor that the alcohol industry, and I include all alcohol industry, has an obligation to help reduce alcohol use disorder. So I think there is a need right now for people at wineries. Like, for example, we have training for our staff so that they don't pour too much wine for people. It's very easy to be on vacation and drink too much.
Spitting is more for people who work in the industry, but people aren't used to it.
I think we need to do so much work around that. And then, some people probably shouldn't drink, because it's too hard to drink moderately.
Addictive personalities, things like that.
It's not necessarily, mostly it's circumstance. We're all addictive, It's mostly circumstance. You grow up drinking in moderation and nothing.
But what is moderate? When you say moderation, what is that for you? Is that like a glass? Because I define it as 2 glasses a day for men, 1 for women, which is the way the U.S.
The reason
dietary
that's
guidelines.
Moderation is because that's what's been studied, and that's what's been shown in some studies to reduce mortality. Whereas once you get over those numbers, then you might have bad things happen, such as potentially an increase in cancer risk, and the reality is that the 1 or 2 is also important, because if you're binge drinking, that is definitely not healthy. So, people that say, well, I rarely drink, but then once a month they get completely drunk. Yeah. That's not very healthy.
And you have a website with your findings. Yeah. So yeah. I don't want to focus the conversation too much on that, but if you do want to read all of what Laura's putting together on alcohol consumption, the effect on the industry, what's the website?
indefenseofwine.com.
indefenseofwine.com.
Yeah.
indefenseofwine.com. Yeah. Take a look at that. So I do want to pivot the conversation a little bit. So in 1995, that's when you decided to pivot and join the family business, correct? Yeah. Okay.
And well, I didn't really make any firm decisions. What happened is that my dad asked me to go to the New York Wine Experience. And previous to that, I had been accompanying my dad as his translator to France. This was my dad's way of not giving up on me, even if I had said, I am going to be a doctor, I'm going to drink your wines, but I'm not going to work with you.
Okay, I'm sure he wasn't too upset.
No, he was upset. He
was upset that you went into...
I wanted to be medicine, yeah. He was the only person I knew that was upset their kid wanted to be a doctor. Like literally, he was
probably the only person in the world that goes to Harvard undergrad, Stanford medicine.
No, he was not happy. He was not happy. So anyhow, so I would go to France with him as his translator, and so I became completely, enamored with wine, with the whole culture behind French wine, and I started reading about wine and going to tastings. Meanwhile, I'm in medical school, I'm in residency, but I'm developing a real interest in wine. So
tasting
all these, they were a lot cheaper back then. And my dad actually gave me an Amex, and he said, you can buy all the wine you want.
This is Burgundy, Bordeaux,
anything.
Champagne.
And literally, he said, you buy anything you want. And I was 19, and I was in Boston, and you could drink under 21. And literally, I never got drunk because I would buy these expensive bottles, and then, we would sit in the dorm room with my dad, and then we'd have the leftover, and I'd invite my friends, and it would be 10 people drinking one bottle.
Do you remember one bottle that really just was special?
Vega Sicilia Valbuena.
Vega Sicilia Valbuena.
Not even
Spain.
Único, because that was really expensive. So Vega Sicilia Valbuena, I thought that wine was so magical. I remember that wine. I'll never forget that wine.
Wow, it was. What was special about it to you?
I just remember thinking it was so beautiful, so perfect, so elegant, and just so delicious. Mm-hmm. And I love the story that it was, kind of, this famous wine from Spain when everybody else was talking about France, and this was Spain.
Yeah.
Having a Grand Cru level wine. I also love that about the wine. I have part Italian, part Spanish, so I also have a lot of love for Spain.
Exactly. Spain. And I'm sure you tried Italian wines too, going back to your heritage.
I love Italian. I mean, of course, Maceto and Tignanello, all the Antinori wines. I love the Antinori wines. Also, the Pergole Torte was one of my early favorites.
Wow, I'm still down to try that.
Yeah. Oh, that's such a great wine.
So Barolo, Chianti Classico.
Oh, yeah. I mean, of course, and then we became friends with the Gaias and the Antinoris because we would meet them at all the fairs, and they would get all the same awards that my dad was getting, like Decanter Man of the Year, or now it's Person of the Year, and then the Wine Spectator Award. So we became family friends, and we would drink each other's wines.
Yeah, and going to New York Wine Experience and seeing your dad, Nicolas, who's really credited with taking Argentina wine to the next level, to a much higher quality. What was it like seeing him in New York and people knowing him and him having a big reputation?
I'll tell you a funny story. When we recently got this award from Drinks International, that they have a voting from wine specialists, and they rank the most admired wine brands. Drinks International from UK. And we actually came in number 1, and number 2 was Gaia, and a few numbers down was Antinori. And I was telling my dad, oh my God, Papa, do you remember when we went to these events like the New York Wine Experience, like some of these big decanter events? I was actually, before telling you about the first time that I represented the winery, and I'm going to tell you in a minute, New York Wine Experience, but back to this award, the most admired wine brand, and I said, Papa, do you remember how we would go to these events, nobody knew Catena. So in the 90s, really nobody knew us. Nobody knew Argentine wine. You couldn't even sell Malbec. You would go to an account and pour your Malbec, and people would say, oh, this is delicious, but I can't sell it because nobody wants Malbec. Nobody knew Malbec when we started. Mm-hmm. And I would actually literally be in med school and get one day off, and my dad would say, go around with the salesperson. and that's...
And you would see that. You would literally see it happen.
And I would see that people were not interested. And so we would hear Piero Antinori and Angelo Gaia, who are such great speakers. And I would say, Papa, you have to do what they're doing. The minute I started with my dad, I was like, you have to be like them, where you can get these crowds and talk about your region. And, like, imagine, Barolo and Barbaresco. I mean, Barolo was the famous one. Nobody knew Barbaresco. And Angelo Gaia basically made Barbaresco known.
Yeah.
And so I was like, Papa, you need to do this for Malbec. And he would look at me terrified and say, no, Laurita, you are going to do this. I'm not going to do this.
Because your personalities were a bit different
personalities,
there.
And also, his English is very good, but he does not like to give a speech in English at all. Mm-hmm. Even if, he studied at Columbia and his English is excellent, but he does not like to speak in public or, do big tastings. He loves a one-on-one tasting.
Exactly.
But anyhow, and here we are today on these lists, and we're ranking, along
incredible.
with all these wineries. But it wasn't that long ago that, my dad and I were just like complete newbies, and to us, these people were just so much higher than us.
And it seems like he really trusted your voice. He wasn't like, this is how we do things. He really was open to you collaborating with him and all that. And with that common thread, what he was doing in the 90s, he decided to plant Adriana Vineyard,
exactly.
What is known as really the highest tier, really cru-focused wine.
In a place where everybody said, "Oh, it's too cold, nothing's going to ripen."
And now look, what what is it's
the now it's like it's at the top the Pauillac. It's like the the Romanée Conti of
So he really had that vision and stuck to his guns when people weren't with that. So he was a big influence on you with that.
Well, so going back to how did I start working with him? Basically, he asked me to go to the New York Wine Experience because we were the first South American winery to be invited to the New York Wine Experience. You've been to the New York Wine Experience.
Yeah. The New York Wine Experience is Wine Spectator's annual wine fair. It's been going on for 45 years now. Yeah. And it's been very important for a lot of wineries.
It's amazing. And you have all these really famous wineries, and they demand that the owners or the head winemaker show up. So you get to meet all these really cool people from wineries all over the world. So he sends me and he says, Laurita, you have to go because you're the only one here who speaks English correctly.
Perfect. And how old were you?
I was probably there like in my mid to late 20s.
Okay, because you were 19 when you were tasting bottles in Boston. There.
So then now I'm in between 19 and my mid 20s, I'm basically tasting a lot of really good wine. So I knew a lot about wine at that point. So my dad says, can you go? And I go to this and I see we have this little table, and then there's these long lines with the famous properties. And
the line for Lafite, the line for Mouton.
Exactly. For the famous California wineries, the Italians, and I've got the occasional person that comes, and most people are looking at my sign and they see Argentina, they just keep on walking. And the worst was some guy tasted the French wine next to me and used my spittoon. And I was thinking, you know what? That's like a dog peeing in the neighbor's house.
Yeah. That lit the fire
that
in
really
you, right?
lit the fire, because I was like, wow, this person didn't even have the decency to taste my wine. They just used my spittoon.
Yeah.
And so the next day I call my dad. I'm like, Papa, I have to help you with this because this whole dream of yours of making Argentine wines that compete with the best of the world, we have the quality, but who's going to believe you? And so he immediately offered me to be in charge of all the exports. And I said, no, Papa, I'm still a doctor. I haven't changed my mind. But I can help you with the research. And that's how I came to found the Catena Institute of Wine, because I said, listen, the Cistercian monks had about 200, 400 years, right, to do their trial and error. We don't have that. So we need to do research to figure out how to make these wines that are going to, compete with the best of the world, because that was the objective.
But when people tasted the wines, is that when you got them hooked? Or did people not even go to the table because they're like, Argentina, I don't even want to try it?
When people would taste the wines, they were hooked, always.
Okay.
And
so
my
the quality,
mom, the quality was there even at the beginning. My mom tells this story of when she used to go out with the Catena Chardonnay. So initially we made Chardonnay and Cabernet, not Malbec. Malbec came after.
Okay.
Because my dad thought that he should first convince people with the king and queen with the
it's a sound business decision that Cabernet sells.
But in the early 90s, it was everything about Cabernet and Chardonnay. Now we have many other varieties that are well known, but back then it was much more monovarietal. And so my mom goes out with Catena Chardonnay, and she tells the story, and it's been verified by multiple people, that she would go into an account and she'd say, oh, here's my wine from Argentina. And they say, oh, at that price, I'm not going to buy wine from Argentina. And she'd say, oh, what's your favorite Chardonnay? And they say, oh, this one, like, I don't know, Gras Chardonnay or some French wine. And she would give them her credit card, buy the bottle. She always brought these little brown bags, and she would put it against our wine. And she claims that we always won.
Yeah.
And I thought that was just my mom being optimistic, but I've asked several people, and they said, no, your mom is right. This is what actually happened.
Put them to the test.
And so we sold one bottle at a time through taste, and that's the same thing we did with Malbec. When people tasted the wine, it was so delicious, and yeah, I mean,
people always wonder how these incredible wineries got to this stage, and I love that you're talking to me about this really grassroots operation of just.
It was very grassroots.
It took up a lot of time. It was just
and it was just doing one tasting, another tasting, and then some journalists that would give you an interview, and then they would come to Argentina, and just it was multiple little things.
Were the critics into it? You mentioned were the critics?
Everybody that tastes them was into it. So there was one big breakthrough, which was Wall Street Journal, when Dottie, remember Dottie and her husband John?
Yes.
Okay, so Dottie and her husband John used to have this column. Now it's Letty T, who just wrote about Malbec.
I did see that.
A great article about Malbec.
And she about the paraje.
But she basically said that Malbec has grown up, and now you need to taste all the single vineyard versions, and she was really positive about the variety.
No, and I'm glad you bring that up, because it makes me think. People ask you sometimes, and I know it bugs you, what's after Malbec? What comes after Malbec? And people don't say in Burgundy, what comes after Pinot Noir? It is Pinot Noir, and it is Malbec here. There's no looking other ways.
Well, no, but I think we have other varieties that do really well. So,
100%.
But I think that doesn't mean that you need to de-emphasize Malbec. We are the everything for Malbec. There is some Malbec made in France, which is actually quite good, but most of the Malbec plant in the world is in Argentina. We have all these different regions, we have sub-regions, we have sub-parcels, we have Salta, we have Patagonia. I mean, Malbec from Argentina is extraordinary, and there's also other varieties that do really well. You don't need, one and not the other. So
exactly, and the story of Malbec is really, really interesting. And Laura is also an author. She's written countless books. I don't know how you got the time. So the book Gold in the Vineyards, I think it's called The Story of Malbec. It's the illustrations.
Well, no, that's Gold in the Vineyards is the book about
all the
top vineyards in the world.
You see, this is my example. I'm getting confused with all the books. Malbec Mon Amour.
Malbec Mon Amour. Mon Amour. We said it in French.
Malbec Mon Amour is the story of Malbec with great illustrations, and Alejandro Gil.
Yeah, so I co-wrote it with Alejandro Gil, and we even had art and Malbec pairing, music and Malbec pairing. Amazing. We have the origins in France, so it's a real nod to the French origins. That's why we gave it a French name, and we love the Cahors wines. We know a lot of people there. But back to your original question about what was the breakthrough, of course it was opening a lot of bottles, and there were other producers from Argentina who started really, pushing exports once the exchange rate changed after 2001. So before 2001, you barely made money with exports.
Yeah.
Because the peso and the dollar were pegged to each other under the Menem administration. And then when when the big devaluation happened, all of a sudden it was more advantageous to export. And then a lot of people kind of jumped into the wagon and started traveling. But Wall Street Journal did an article on Malbec.
Do you remember what year that was?
I think it was like, I don't know, 2001. It was right around, I don't know if it was before or after the exchange rate thing happened, but it was right around then.
Yeah.
And it was the whole article on wine was on Malbec. And it was the first time that a major publication, a consumer publication, had written a big story on Malbec. And I really think there was a before and after. That article made a big difference, because we had made it into a major newspaper in the world.
Yeah, and so when you say the breakthrough, what happened after that?
I think people all of a sudden thought Malbec was no longer some little niche thing, that it was a wine worthy of wine lists, and people just started thinking it more of the top 10 varieties,
Exactly.
There's only enough space in your brain to remember things.
Yeah, and getting into those magazines, the wine publications are important, scores and all that, but when you get it into those publications, it really helps in broadening the speaker there. You had mentioned doing the book with Alejandro Vigil. I want to mention to our listeners, Alejandro Vigil is part of the Catena team. One of the things you do incredible is you're really good at selecting or at putting together good people. Luis Reginato who's been there for a long time. He's the agriculture. He's
the head agronomist.
Head agronomist. Alejandro Vigil. Both of them have been around for over 25 years, I think, with the company. Close to that. Fernando Buscema, who is one of the smartest, most intelligent people I've met.
Head of the Catena Institute.
Exactly, head of Catena Institute, because you can't do everything. But Alejandro Roy Urbieta, who heads the Domenico Pinot Noir project, which we'll talk about in a bit.
And we have some women too. Lucia Vagliaretti, she's one of our leads, and we have a lot of women on the commercial side.
Amazing.
Somehow our women in Catena love the business side. Yeah,
it's awesome. And being, I don't like to focus too much on being a female in the wine business, because I think it's all just like we should talk about it as if it's just normalized. Men and women in the wine business. But did you ever experience something negative because of that, or not at all?
I think the way I answer this is that I came from medicine, where men and women are very integrated. So I mean, medicine already went through the man-woman thing, before wine. When I went into medicine, there was already half and half women, half men. When I went into wine, it was like 10% women, 90% men. So I was going into a field where there was a male majority, but coming from a field where it was very 50-50, and where women had really earned their place in medicine. So if anything ever happened, I didn't notice. So I'm not one of those people who notices things. I'm a little bit immune to being offended. I'm just kind of doing stuff, and now
I see a lot of women running these businesses and in the vineyards. Maybe they take care of the dogs too in Argentina.
Well,
still.
I don't know. I have to say though that in vineyards it is hard. I don't think we have finished the question of men, women, and equality, and not from who's right or who's wrong. I also think there's inequalities towards men. I think that society expects men to have a certain role. And so, men are looked at less kindly if they have to go care for an old person in their family, or they have to go home to a sick child. People still expect women to do that. And I think that's discrimination against men. So my daughter says that this is not very PC what I'm saying, but I think we need a societal reshuffle where whatever you're passionate about, you need to work out with your family.
Exactly.
Who does what, and who's more passionate about one thing or the other. And I don't think there's one formula to create more equality, but I do think that still, the bigger burden of, childcare is falling on women. And I think it is very difficult. For example, if you're managing a vineyard and, your husband's on a trip and you're taking care of your kids and there's a frost, you have to run to the vineyards. Who's going to watch your kids? So I think that that's something that it's still a difficult thing, but it's also difficult for men,
for both.
But it's a long discussion.
Exactly, long discussion. But talking about, you had spoken about your daughter, about the whole PC conversation. I do want to talk about your kids as well, because you went through that experience with your father, of that transition to being in the company. Do you see your kids following suit, or are you kind of the type of mother that's like a step back? If you want to join, you join, or do they want to be doctors?
So the family theory is very Italian. So in Italian current culture, not in the olden days, you were supposed to do whatever your father or your grandfather did. And mostly it was for men. In the current Italian culture, and I've talked to other Italian producers, you don't push your kids into the family business. You let them do their thing, and then they have to come because
they have to come naturally, like the vines.
So that's always been the Catena family philosophy. For me, I really went all the way to something else, and I did fall in love with wine. And today, I feel like I went from taking care of people to taking care of vines, and I feel vines are very worthy of being taken care of. So in the next generation, we have 8. I call them the Catena grandchildren, the nietos. I call them the nietos, even if they're my children. I call them the nietos, the grandchildren. And so we've got 8 of them, and actually, so far only my son Dante is working with the family, and he's actually working on the no alcohol product, the Bodega Elena de Mendoza, Domaine Elena de Mendoza.
Amazing. So getting his foot in the door
and
there.
He's loving it. He's worked some harvest at the winery. The other ones, we don't know. Maybe we'll
like
get another one. I think it's so fun working for the family, but I think also, like my oldest son is doing a postdoc in chemistry, and he wants to do, drug development, as in medications. He has 2 doctor parents. He's very passionate about that, and I think that's what he loves. And, obviously I would never put pressure on somebody to do, a family business. On the other hand, I do sometimes say to my dad, why didn't you tell me it was so fun to make wine or manage a vineyard? And he always says, listen, if I'd pushed you, you wouldn't be here working with me today. And I think that's true.
And is Nicolas still as involved anymore?
Oh, my dad is very involved. He's coming to work every day. And now I have the pleasure of working with my sister, who I think you've met, Adriana.
Yes, Adriana. Yeah. So Adriana Catena, Laura's sister, and also working with El Enemigo Project and Adriana Vineyard.
Yeah, and so the vineyard is named after her. And the reason why is that when my father planted that vineyard, my brother and I were off doing our own thing. I was in...
Adriana Vineyard is planted in Gualtashari. It's the one that Nicolas planted in the 90s.
The one that's been called the Grand Cru of South America.
100%.
I love that title.
Yes.
And so my brother was off in London doing his own thing, and I was going to med school, and then my sister was going every day to the vineyard with my dad. They are very close. My dad's close to all three of us. He's a very, very dedicated father, and he's also a dedicated grandfather. He can sit for 5 hours doing Legos. I don't know many people who can do that. I can't.
Yeah.
And my mother can't either, but my dad can.
Okay, that says a lot about him.
Yeah. So the thing is, I worked with my dad for so many years, and my dad really uses the Socratic method. So when we're talking about something that we disagree with, we ask each other questions, and then we come to a resolution. And honestly, neither of us remembers afterwards whose idea it was or who started with one concept. We really work collaboratively, and we do that with everybody at the winery. We do a lot of collaborative decision making, and then, mostly people then say to me, Laura, you know what? We're not sure here. Can you just decide?
Yeah.
And
that's the philosophy.
And it used to be that person was my dad, and then about 15 years ago, that became me. Mm-hmm. And my dad was very insistent that now I have to make the final call on things. So now working with my sister actually is even better than working with my dad. And you know how much I love working with my dad.
Yeah.
But what I love about my sister is that she has this historic brain. She understands the preservation of culture. And to me, wine and vineyards are to be preserved. So the motto, the vision of the method of the Catena Institute is science to preserve nature and culture. Mm-hmm. So on the nature side, I'm very strong on that because I understand so much science. But to preserve culture, a historian understands how to do that. And my sister was a research historian. She has a PhD from Oxford. Mm-hmm. And not only does she understand how do you do this? How do you get people to care about an old vine, to care about the way people used to?
And that's what this is right
wine.
Here. I mean, this is the Luca.
The Luca Old Vine.
I'm gonna bring it to the camera right here so we see it closely.
Yeah.
The Luca Old Vine project. Sorry, I just want people to see here.
And this is the Malbec Argentino, which is a creation of my sister. So it's a label that tells the history of how Malbec became an important variety. It starts with Eleanor of Aquitaine in the 12th century, and this
is phylloxera.
That's phylloxera. The idea of telling the story of Malbec on a label was my sister's. That's my sister, the last one.
Perfect. Yeah.
With the pyramid winery.
It's a beautiful label.
So having a historian in terms of understanding the preservation aspect of wine, but then also how do you tell stories? And the way my sister's brain works in how to tell a story, and she also did a lot of visual history, so she understands visuals. She and my dad are obsessed with architecture. My brother too. My brother makes his own wines, and they are the aesthetic people in the family, and they are obsessed with aesthetics, with culture. My dad is obsessed with sitting down for a meal and not getting up too early. I am execution oriented person.
Okay, so you guys complement each other.
And my dad and I potentially are a little more on the scientific side. He's an economist. I'm a biologist, medical doctor, and my sister has this historian's perspective that I think is so interesting. And she and I complement each other so well. And because I'm the older sister, we're already used to me being there before her. And so we don't have really an ego conflict.
There's not a lot of.
And
sure, there'll be bad days, but
yeah. No. But to me, she brings ideas that I've never heard of. Mm-hmm. She comes up with things that I can't even imagine.
With the same goal in mind.
So the amount of creativity that she has, coming from her own brain, but also the historian's perspective, I think is so interesting. And people tell you, what are you going to use a history degree for? And I think that wine is a very good use.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're talking about the goal. The goal is the same for her and for you. It's the same, and you're trying to achieve it in different ways.
Yeah.
In terms of old vines, preserving old vines,
Yeah.
one, why is that important? And two, is it hard to sell that? Because for a consumer, they see old vines, they're like, is this wine better? I don't know. Like, what is
Absolutely.
old vine
So
do?
I was just at this old wine conference where there were people from Spain, from France, from Italy. It was amazing. And we were actually talking about old vines. And I presented a researcher from Spain, from Campo de Borja, where they did research showing that old vines have more complexity of aromatics and show terroir better than young vines.
And old vine would be what, like 30 years?
Over 35 years. Over 35 years is the OIV definition.
Okay.
So in Argentina, we have about 60,000 acres of over 55-year-old vines, which is a lot.
Yes.
Yeah. So the Catena family owns a vineyard called Angelica, where we have a selection of cuttings that we plant in all our other vineyards. So it's called the Catena cuttings, and it's an old pre-phylloxera Massal selection that we plant in all our vineyards. And
so that's taking a piece of an old vine and sort of replanting it into the ground?
So that's a muron. So basically, when we're planting a new vineyard, we go to this vineyard and we take cuttings, we put them in little pots, and we replant that.
Okay.
So you're basically reproducing the plant selection in a new vineyard.
The clone, the same,
Well, these are Massals. So most wineries in the world will go to a vine nursery and say, I want clone 7 of Cabernet, which is really qualitative. And maybe they'll plant 7 and 167. They have 2 individuals. Like they plant Sean and Laura.
Okay.
A Massal vineyard is like the whole Plaza de Mayo. All those people out there, like hundreds of people, they're all individuals. When you do a Massal selection, you take the little arms and legs of all the vines instead of just Sean and Laura. We would be clone Sean and clone Laura. There you're taking like, Maria, Josefina, Lucrecia, Jose, Pedro, and you're reproducing like heirloom tomatoes. That's a good comparison. So in Argentina, 90% of vineyards are like that, and most of the rest of the world, they're clonal. So this is super interesting. But our old vineyard, which was planted between 1922 and 1924, we've reproduced it in our other vineyards. Now, in Argentina alone, there's hundreds, thousands of small vineyards owned by families that are also genetically diverse. And we are now working at Catena to preserve that genetic diversity. So we're taking cuttings from all these vineyards that are at risk of being pulled out, because a 100-year-old vineyard is not producing a lot, and most likely is going to be pulled out.
No, it's going to be replanted, or put a neighborhood on top of it.
So we actually are doing this monumental work of preserving all these vineyards. For Luca, what I started doing, and this was 25 years ago, I started talking about old vines 25 years ago, and nobody cared.
Before it was cool.
Nobody cared. And I kept on repeating it. And I remember having an importer say, Laura, bring us something new to tell. I was like, no. Old vines are really important. We need to repeat. How, if you pull them when they're young and they're still producing, I think that's an assassination. I used that term for the first time at the Old Vine Conference, and Rosa Kruger from South Africa, who is another Old Vine Hero, I won the Old Vine Hero Award. She thinks that's a very appropriate term. And she has this wonderful South African accent.
And it's an assassination.
She's like, it's an assassination. And so, we need to care about these old vines because they're still producing. They're not ready to retire.
And they're producing, let's say, flavors that you couldn't find.
You couldn't find. And so, I think most consumers would be willing to pay $1 or $2 more per bottle to help preserve these old vines. So, a lot of the issue with old vines is getting people to know the story of them. And I think that's the important work that we need to do now.
Yeah, Blake Gray from San Francisco, he wrote a really good article in Wine Searcher, really explaining he's very honest in his writing, and he's a very entertaining writer, but explaining why they could be important, what they hold, heritage, sustainability.
You know what? I was sitting next to him at the conference. Did he already write something?
Yeah, he already wrote something.
Oh my God, I need to read that.
You should read it. You should read it. It's
Wait,
really...
will you send it to me?
Yes, I'll send that to you.
What did he write on Wine Searcher?
Wine Searcher.
Okay,
yeah,
cool.
I'll send that to you.
Please send it to me.
So it feels like we're talking a lot about challenges that you're solving in your work. So with Nicolas, he had his generational challenge. I think every generation in a family business has to face an existential challenge for either their business or for wine in general. What do you think your biggest challenge has been and is currently, and what do you think the next generation of Catenas, your nietos, what will be their big challenge?
Yeah. Well, when people ask me the question of what's your contribution, I always say I have the same goal as my father, to make Argentine wines that can stand with the best of the world. And we've already made wine as a family for 200 years. I hope that we're still making wine as a family in 200 years. Now, what are the challenges? They're endless. You know, now we have vineyard viruses. How do you preserve a Massal selection with vineyard viruses? We're still trying to figure that out. You know, you have climate change. For us, it's not heat. The heat's not the biggest problem. It's water shortage because the Andean glaciers are becoming smaller. There's, you know, a lot of diseases, you know, wood disease, again, viruses. There's like every 10 years they have a new one pop up. Esca, that's more like a fungal disease.
Yeah, okay.
You know, but that's from pruning. And so, you know, we already had phylloxera that required grafting. So, you know, climate change makes it so that certain varieties like Pinot Noir and Burgundy, you know, are developing flavors that are not the classic flavors. So do you need to plant it somewhere else? So I think that there's constant threats. You know, now there's this potential threat of decrease in consumption, which to me is actually a good thing. You know why?
Wow, because the first time I've ever heard this. Okay.
As a doctor, to me, the biggest enemy of wine is alcohol use disorder or, you know, people drinking too much of any kind of alcohol.
Okay.
And so people drinking less is actually what I've wanted my whole life. You know, less but better.
Less but better. You think that's kind of the movement that's happening? People are drinking less but better.
And less but better doesn't mean, you know, now I'm drinking a $100 bottle of wine. It means wherever my level was before, maybe I spend the same amount of money and I get more quality. So I'm definitely not a snob saying, you know, you should have these fancy bottles. I think some of the simplest wines are extraordinary, like Southern Italian, even like Torrontés. It's a very simple wine. I love it. Like a fresh Torrontés in the summer.
And I love what you're saying because I find myself gearing towards that more as well. I mean, I being in the business, I do get to taste a lot of wine, but drinking better wines. But from a business standpoint, doesn't that have a negative impact on a business?
No, but listen, the reality is that there's less water. There's less farmland because there's all these cities being built. And it's not healthy to drink too much. So for me, if we can drink less...
It's more of a recalibration.
It's a recalibration. I think there was excess drinking during the pandemic. And so if we can get as close as we can to moderation, I'm also not a preachy person. I tell people, listen, this is what moderation is. If you're drinking 1 bottle per day, which I know a lot of people who are, I say, and you now go to drinking 3/4 of a bottle, that's really great from a health standpoint. You know, the ideal is 1 to 2 glasses, you know, for women, 1 for... But anything you can do to reduce if you're drinking too much, if you're getting completely drunk, you know, every weekend, try to not get completely drunk. Try to get a little drunk. That's already great for your health. So I do not like preachiness, and as a doctor, I was never preachy. I give you the options, I give you the information, you've got to make your decision. The only thing where I have a hard line is drunk driving. That is horrible. No one should do it, and that's a big
being an
problem.
emergency room physician, you've seen a lot of
it's tragic, and so that's where I am completely preachy about that.
Okay.
But other things, I think everybody needs to make their own decision, and you know, and some people are so healthy otherwise that if they want to indulge a little extra in wine and that's their thing, and they're always having it with food, I feel like, you know, who am I to tell them? They're running every day, they eat healthy, and they want to have. It's a woman who wants to have 2 glasses instead of 1. Like that's their decision.
A lot of times the people that are drinking wine like that tend to be very healthy, fitness-wise and all that.
So I feel like people need to make their own decisions. My role as a physician, which, you know, now I'm talking about wine, so I'm not in my role as a physician, is to give the information. And I also tell people, talk to your doctor, because, you know, you may have a liver problem for some other reason. And then you may need to drink less or not at all. So I tell people, listen, even if you go to my website in defense of wine and you read something, don't apply it until you talk to your doctor. And you make sure that for your particular history, whatever amount of drinking that is in the dietary guidelines is appropriate.
Yeah, and do you think the challenge for the coming generation is going to be similar to what you're saying now? It seems like climate change isn't really going away.
No, and so I think it's going to be more expensive to make wine, and even other things. You know, we also, you know, there's, you know, glass is polluting, and so I think
the weight of glass. Jancis Robinson,
she talks a lot about that, and she's so right. We've reduced the weight of our bottles by 40% in the last 15 years. So I think that I think if moderate wine drinking with food becomes the norm, that would be fantastic, and drinking less.
Very
I think
very
it's
Italian,
very
right?
Italian.
Very Italian.
Yeah.
Wine is part of the meal.
Yeah, yeah.
One of the last questions I have for you is, what do you think is the future of Argentinian wine, right? I live in Miami. I know plenty of wine collectors there, and collectors just, they always, they go to Europe, they go to the old world. Some of them are focused in Napa, and it really takes some time to get them to Argentina. So what do you think the future is for Argentinian wine? How do you push that next level for?
I'm looking at my phone for the name of Eduardo's store in Miami.
For Bernardo's?
Bernardo's store.
Yeah, Vino Nueva.
Vino Nueva.
Vino Nueva, great wine shop in Miami.
So
Bernardo,
Vino
if you're
Nueva,
listening.
Bernardo.
Yeah.
I was there yesterday, and Vino Nueva has the Grand Cru classes from Burgundy mixed with Adriana Vineyard, with Chilean wine, with Australian wine. It's all in the elite cellar, which is wines over $100 retail. So he has a cellar, and he has everything mixed together.
In the shop in Miami. Yeah.
And he says it works really great, because people are so excited to see all these wines.
So it's not like a Bordeaux section, Napa section. It's all mixed with.
He's just like, these are the top wines in the world from the top producers. They're all in here, and they're expensive because they usually come from limited production and from really top producers.
High quality vineyard.
And he has Italy, Spain, everything mixed together. If that's the future, that's a great future, because as a consumer, you just go in there and you get tempted by all this beauty from all over the world. And yeah, I think it's very short-sighted when you go into a store and the super premium or like the super fancy wine is all French. That's from another era.
And same thing with wine lists too at restaurants. They separate into region all the time. And I think something creative that would do it. These are the top wines right here. And when you drink White Bones or you drink Mundo Vacilos, which to me is
I mean, it's like it's had multiple 100-point ratings that are the same ratings that top wines from the rest of the world. Actually, we have our average ratings for our top wines, Mundus, Nicolás, and Malbec Argentina, are higher than the first growths.
Okay.
Not all of them, but some of them.
Exactly. So I think that's good. That's a good answer.
So to me, the thing is, going from the ratings that put us in the same category to people actually putting it in their cellar, and for restaurants and wine stores to actually honor these top cuvées from the rest of the world along with the top cuvées from France.
That are all age-worthy too. All of them are on the same level of cellaring, because I have tried older wines from your team, and even the whites. I mean, as well, both the whites and the reds are fantastic in the cellar. Laura, I want to thank you so much for making the time in your busy schedule. Thank you everyone for listening, and stay tuned for our next episode. Cheers.